The first light of dawn stretched lazily over the Hammond farm, casting long golden shadows across the fields of wheat and corn. Dew clung to the leaves, sparkling like 1,000 tiny diamonds in the early sun. The gentle hum of insects mixed with the occasional crowing of a rooster and the distant lowing of cows from the pasture. Life here had its rhythm, predictable and comforting, a stark contrast to the chaos of the nearby town. Tom Hammond stepped onto the creaking wooden porch of his farmhouse, inhaling deeply. The scent of rich soil, fresh hay, and morning dew filled his lungs. His gaze swept across the property, the neat rows of corn swaying in the breeze, the barn with its peeling red paint, the chicken coop where Emily had already been gathering eggs, and the small orchard at the edge of the property where apple blossoms were just beginning to bloom. He could hear the faint clucking of hens, the soft neigh of a horse from the neighboring farm, and the distant flutter of wings as birds took flight. For Tom, these sounds were the heartbeat of the farm, a daily reminder that life, in all its simplicity, moved on steadily and reliably. Farming had been in his family for generations. His father had handed him the land before passing, trusting that he would continue the legacy with care and dedication. Tom's late wife, Margaret, had loved the farm almost as much as he did, and together they had built a life rooted in the earth. Now, after her passing, the farm had become both his sanctuary and his responsibility, a place to honor her memory. Each morning, Emily, now 15, joined him in chores, feeding the livestock, checking the fences, and helping in the barn. She had inherited her mother's gentle touch with animals and her father's strong work ethic. And Tom took quiet pride in seeing her grow into a capable young woman as he watched Emily crouch by the chicken coop, gently collecting the warm, freshly laid eggs. He felt a sense of contentment settle over him. Here, on this farm, the world's problems felt distant. It was just family, land, an honest work, a world he could control. And then that peace was shattered. A low rumble, distant at first, grew steadily louder. Tom's brow furrowed. The sound was harsh and unnatural, a vehicle traversing the gravel lane that led to the farmhouse. He squinted toward the tree line where the lane met the horizon, and his stomach sank. A black SUV, sleek and foreign against the rustic backdrop, appeared, kicking up clouds of dust that glimmered in the morning light. Tom's pulse quickened as he recognized the telltale signs: mirrored windows, a set of heavy-duty tires, and a uniformed figure stepping out of the driver's seat. The SUV came to a halt near the barn, engine idling. The man who emerged was tall, with mirrored sunglasses that reflected the fields like a distorted panorama. A walkie-talkie dangled from his belt, and a clipboard was tucked under his arm. Every movement he made radiated confidence and authority, as if he owned not just the SUV but the entire property. Tom's jaw tightened. Who are you?" he demanded, stepping off the porch toward the intruder, his boots crunching against the gravel. The officer didn't flinch, his mirrored gaze fixed on the barn as though scanning for intruders. "I'm a security officer," the man said smoothly, his voice carrying an air of superiority. "I'm conducting a routine check. Reports indicate suspicious activity in this area." Tom's fists clenched. "This is my property. You don't have permission to be here. Leave now." The officer tilted his head slightly, as though evaluating Tom. "Sir, my job is to ensure safety. Trespassing is a serious matter. I'll need to inspect the premises." The threat hung in the morning air like a storm cloud. Tom's pulse raced not from fear, but from indignation. He had spent decades building this farm with care, tending to the soil, the animals, and the fences. No outsider would violate this sanctuary without consequences. Emily had stepped closer, her eyes wide with concern. "Dad." "He's not listening," she whispered. Tom felt a pang of frustration mixed with protectiveness. His daughter had never seen him truly angry, and now she was witnessing the first tremor of that anger, from the edge of the woods lining the property. A figure observed silently. General Robert Whitman, a retired Army officer who had purchased the neighboring property, had been tending his garden when he noticed the SUV. Even in his 70s, his posture was rigid, eyes sharp. He could sense imbalance immediately: the confidence of the officer, the alertness of Tom, and the subtle tension rippling through the air. Whitman had retired to this quiet countryside to escape conflict, to live among nature and peace. But he had spent a lifetime recognizing threats before they fully materialized. And now, his instincts screamed that this was one of those moments. The intruder was not just arrogant, he was dangerous in his ignorance. About to overstep boundaries that should have been obvious as the SUV, its engine vibrating the gravel underfoot. The officer began striding toward the barn, clipboard in hand, exuding entitlement and confidence. Dust swirled around his boots as he approached, unaware that his actions were being observed with the scrutiny of a lifetime of discipline. Tom planted himself firmly in the path, muscles taut, voice firm. "I warned you. You are trespassing. Leave now, or I will call the authorities." The officer laughed lightly, a sound that grated against the serenity of the farm. "Sir, this is for your safety. Step aside. I have a protocol to follow." Tom's eyes narrowed. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his family, his farm, and decades of labor behind him. "You are on private property. You have no right to be here. Step back." The first act of confrontation had begun, and neither man yet realized that the balance of power was about to shift dramatically. From the tree line, Whitman's eyes never left the scene. A calm storm was brewing, one that would soon remind the intruder that trespassing on this land was not just illegal, it was a mistake he would never forget. The morning air was thick with tension. Dust swirled lazily around the black SUV as the officer took another step toward the barn. Clipboard clutched like a shield, his mirrored sunglasses reflecting the farm in distorted shards. Tom stood firmly in front of the barn doors, muscles tense, heart pounding with a mix of frustration and protective instinct. He was a man who understood the land he worked, the animals he cared for, and the routines that governed life here, and he would not allow anyone to violate it. Emily crept closer, clutching a small basket of eggs she had gathered moments before. Her wide eyes darted between her father and the officer, her body tense. She had always known that her father could be firm, but today his composure carried a weight she had never seen before. "Sir," the officer said, his voice flat and practiced, "you don't understand. I'm following protocol." Reports of suspicious activity in this area require me to inspect any property that appears unoccupied or unsecured. I cannot allow you to interfere." Tom shook his head, feeling a surge of disbelief. "There are no reports. No one called you here. This is my land. You are trespassing, and I am asking you one last time, leave immediately." The officer's lips curled into a smirk, his confidence unshaken. "You're making this difficult for yourself. Compliance is easier. Resistance can have consequences." Emily's voice trembled as she spoke up. "Dad, what do we do?" Tom placed a steady hand on her shoulder, squeezing gently. "Stay calm, Emily. He's testing us. Don't show fear." The officer ignored her, moving closer to the barn, clipboard raised, as if documenting the farm itself as evidence of some imagined crime. Every step he took on the gravel seemed to echo across the property, a calculated rhythm meant to intimidate. Tom's jaw tightened. He had dealt with stubborn neighbors and city inspectors, but never someone who had no respect for boundaries. From the edge of the tree line, General Robert Whitman watched silently. His eyes, sharp and calculating, traced every movement. He could see the officer's arrogance, the subtle tension in Tom's shoulders, and the unease creeping into Emily's posture. Whitman had spent decades analyzing human behavior, predicting outcomes, and commanding situations. The intruder's confidence would not last. It was built on ignorance of the farm, the family, and the law. Whitman stepped forward slowly, boots crunching on fallen leaves and gravel. The movement was deliberate, measured, each step conveying authority without aggression. He emerged into view, tall and imposing even at 72. His posture erect, chest squared, and eyes sharp beneath a shock of silver hair. "Sir," Whitman said, his voice calm yet carrying the unmistakable weight of command, "you are on private property without authorization. Step back immediately." The officer turned abruptly, startled by the sudden presence. His hand instinctively moved toward his radio. Who are you?" he stammered. Whitman's gaze never wavered. "I am General Robert Whitman. I live next door, and I watch over this area. I will not tolerate trespassers who threaten residents." A bead of sweat formed on the officer's temple. His smirk faltered, replaced by uncertainty. I'm just following protocol. This is a routine inspection." Whitman took a deliberate step closer, closing the distance without a hint of hesitation. "Routine does not grant you the right to violate property laws. You are trespassing. Leave now, or legal action will follow." Tom exhaled slowly, relief washing over him. He had felt alone moments ago, outnumbered by the officer's arrogance. Now, with Whitman standing beside him, he felt the scales of power shift. The officer glanced around, suddenly aware of the neighbors peeking from behind fences and windows. Their expressions, curious at first, had begun to harden into silent judgment. This was no longer a simple confrontation, it had become a public spectacle. And for the first time, the officer's confidence faltered. You can't do this," he muttered, voice wavering slightly. "I have authorization." Whitman's eyes narrowed. "Authorization does not equal immunity. You are accountable to the law, not just your company's rules. Step off this property. Emily tightened her grip on the basket of eggs, her knuckles white. She looked at her father, and then at the general, and felt a strange sense of reassurance. Courage, she realized, came in many forms, sometimes quiet, sometimes commanding. And sometimes it arrived exactly when you needed it most. The officer's hand twitched toward his radio again, perhaps thinking to summon backup. Whitman anticipated the move, his eyes locking on the man's wrist. Do not call anyone. You are not authorized to detain or confront us. Any attempt to escalate will be met with legal consequences. For the first time, fear seeped into the officer's demeanor. His smirk had vanished entirely, replaced by hesitation and uncertainty. He had underestimated the quiet power of observation and experience. Tom stepped slightly forward, voice firm. You heard him? Leave this land immediately, now. The officer's gaze flicked back to the SUV, then to the gathering neighbors, and finally to Whitman. He realized that resistance would serve no purpose. The authority he had presumed was empty here. With a muttered curse, the officer took a step back, then another. He retreated toward his vehicle, shoving the clipboard into the passenger seat and muttering about reporting the incident. The SUV's engine roared to life, throwing gravel into the air, and within moments, he had disappeared down the dirt lane. Emily ran forward, hugging her father tightly. We're safe, she whispered, relief flooding her voice. Tom's chest rose and fell as tension drained away. He looked toward the woods where Whitman had been watching. The retired general's expression was calm, unreadable, yet there was an unmistakable pride in his eyes. He had intervened, not with force, but with presence, strategy, and authority, the quiet power of experience. Tom finally allowed himself to speak, voice shaking slightly with gratitude. Thank you. I don't know what we would have done without you. Whitman gave a modest nod. It's not about heroics. It's about principles. Some lessons are best learned without violence, but with firmness. Trespassing has consequences, and you were ready to enforce yours. I just made sure he understood that. Emily looked up at the general, awe written across her face. I want to be brave like you someday. Whitman's eyes softened. Bravery isn't about confrontation, Emily. It's about knowing when to stand, when to wait, and when to act. Today, all of you did that. The farm settled back into quiet again, though a subtle shift had occurred. The balance of power had changed, and the family and the neighbors watching had learned a lesson in courage, vigilance, and the importance of standing up for one's home. The morning sun continued to rise, bathing the fields in golden light. The Hammond farm remained a sanctuary, untouched, peaceful, and now fortified by the presence of a retired general who understood the true meaning of protection. The morning sun had climbed higher, casting bright streaks of light across the Hammond farm, but the air remained thick with tension. Tom and Emily stood near the barn, eyes fixed on the black SUV that had just retreated down the gravel lane. Though the immediate threat was gone, the memory of the officer's arrogance lingered like smoke, and the possibility of a return hung ominously. General Robert Whitman stepped onto the dirt path between the two properties, his boots crunching against the gravel with measured precision. His silver hair glinted in the sunlight, and the sharp lines of his face reflected decades of discipline and authority. Though he moved slowly, every motion conveyed control, and his presence alone was enough to command attention. "Tom," Whitman said calmly, voice carrying over the quiet farm, "remain vigilant. That officer may return, emboldened by frustration." People who rely on authority as a shield often forget that it has limits. Tom nodded, swallowing hard. "I didn't realize how bold he'd be. I thought being firm would be enough." Whitman's gaze swept across the fields, noting the boundaries of the property, the placement of the barn and outbuildings, and the positions where any observer might hide. Being firm is not enough without strategy. You hold your ground, but you also anticipate. Preparation is as important as courage. Emily, standing beside her father, clutched a small basket of eggs. Her knuckles were white, and her eyes wide with awe. He didn't even raise his voice. He just stood there, and the officer backed down. Whitman gave a subtle nod. Authority isn't about shouting or threats. It's about presence, consistency, and understanding leverage. Today, he learned that trespassing has consequences, and you learned how to protect what's yours. Tom exhaled slowly, relief mingled with curiosity. "Do you think he'll come back?" Whitman's eyes narrowed. "Perhaps. But if he does, he will know exactly what he is up against." Today's lesson will not be forgotten easily. As the three of them spoke, a subtle stirring began at the edges of the property. Neighbors, who had initially peeked through curtains and over fences, began stepping out into the open. An elderly couple from the farmhouse across the lane leaned on their walking sticks, murmuring among themselves. A group of teenagers from down the road whispered, yet their eyes were fixed on the unfolding scene. Tom realized something remarkable. The general's presence had shifted the dynamics of the entire neighborhood. Where fear had once kept residents silent, there was now curiosity, admiration, and a flicker of courage. Suddenly, the sound of gravel shifting alerted them to movement. From the tree line, the officer returned, not alone this time, but flanked by another uniformed security worker. His confidence had returned, masked by the illusion of numbers. Whitman straightened, his posture rigid and commanding. "Sir," he called out, voice calm but firm, "I warned you once. Trespassing, intimidation, and unlawful seizure of property are not tolerated here. Leave now. You are on private land without permission." The officer faltered, his mouth opening as if to argue, but the general's piercing gaze held him in place. Tom noticed the subtle twitch in his jaw, the way his fingers fidgeted with the clipboard. The bluff was cracking. "You think numbers matter," Whitman continued, stepping slightly forward. "I have decades of experience assessing threats, and I can assure you, confidence based on ignorance will not prevail. Step away, or you will face legal consequences." Emily clutched her father's arm, leaning into him. She had never seen anyone command respect with such quiet authority. Every word, every gesture, communicated power without aggression. The neighbors began to murmur, voices growing louder. "He's right," one said, an elderly woman with a cane. "We've all been bullied by that security company. Maybe someone needs to stand up to them." "Yeah," shouted a man from across the road. They fined me last month for leaving my trailer in my own driveway. The officer's confidence wavered as the crowd grew bolder. He glanced at his companion, who appeared equally uncertain. Even with numbers, they were unprepared for the weight of authority, experience, and community unity converging against them. Whitman's voice cut through the chatter, precise and unwavering. You are not above the law. You do not have the right to intimidate, trespass, or threaten residents. Leave now. The officer swallowed hard. His earlier arrogance had melted into desperation. He fumbled with the radio again, considering calling for backup, but a glance at the growing crowd gave him pause. They were no longer passive observers, they were witnesses, ready to testify against him if he overstepped again. Tom stepped forward, chest heaving. You heard him. Get out of here, now. For a long, tense moment, the officer hesitated, the dust from the road swirling around his boots. His companion shifted nervously. Then, with a muttered curse and a final glare, they both retreated to the SUV. The engine roared to life, gravel spraying as they sped down the lane. Disappearing from sight, Emily exhaled, her body trembling with relief. We did it, she whispered. Tom placed a hand on her shoulder, voice filled with awe. Not just us, Emily. Look at what happened here. Presence, courage, and unity, it's what protected us today. Whitman observed silently, his face calm but satisfied. Today was more than a confrontation. It was a lesson for them, for you, and for the community. Trespassing may seem trivial, but principles, boundaries, and vigilance are never trivial. The neighbors, emboldened by what they had witnessed, began discussing among themselves. For the first time, Tom realized that his little farm was not isolated. It was part of a network of people who, when united, could protect each other from overreach and intimidation. Emily looked up at the general with admiration. I want to be brave like him someday, she murmured. Whitman gave a subtle nod. Courage isn't about confrontation, Emily. It's about knowing when to stand firm, when to observe, and when to act. Today, all of you demonstrated that. The farm, once peaceful and solitary, now felt fortified not by walls or locks, but by vigilance, courage, and the knowledge that those who respected boundaries would be defended. The dust from the departing SUV still lingered in the morning air, hanging like a reminder of the confrontation that had just unfolded. Tom Hammond stood near the barn, chest heaving, hands clenched into fists that trembled slightly from adrenaline. Emily clung to his side, her small frame quivering but her eyes wide with awe. From the edge of the field, General Whitman observed silently. He had watched enough conflicts in his military career to know that a standoff, however brief, was often just the beginning. Today, he had intervened at the precise moment to prevent escalation. But he also knew that lessons learned in the heat of confrontation must be reinforced to hold weight. Tom, Whitman began, voice calm but firm, you handled yourself well. But the presence of authority is not a substitute for preparation. Today's events exposed a weakness in protocol, one that could have escalated quickly without strategic intervention. Tom exhaled slowly, trying to absorb the gravity of Whitman's words. I didn't know what to do at first. I was angry, but I also feared the worst. You showed up just in time. Whitman nodded. Sometimes, intervention is necessary, but it is always preferable to prevent conflict through awareness. Document everything. Notify proper authorities. Ensure this incident is officially recognized. Complacency allows such individuals to return with greater confidence. Emily tilted her head, curiosity mixing with admiration. So, he can't come back. He'll get in trouble. Whitman's eyes softened. The company that employs him will face scrutiny, and the officer will be held accountable. Trespassing and intimidation are not tolerated under law. Today, justice was observed not through violence, but through presence, authority, and vigilance. Tom smiled, though it was tinged with exhaustion. I'll make sure everything is reported. I don't want anyone else on this land without permission. As the morning continued, a subtle change swept through the neighborhood. Neighbors, who had initially watched from a distance, began to approach, emboldened by what they had witnessed. Mr. Jensen, the elderly man across the lane, leaned heavily on his cane as he walked up to Tom. I've seen this security company bully a few of us before. Seems like it takes someone with real authority to remind them that laws exist. A cluster of women from nearby homes nodded in agreement. We should document these encounters, share our experiences, one said. We've all been afraid to speak out. Whitman observed the growing community unity, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Strength lies in awareness and collaboration. Today, this community learned that standing together, observing carefully, and acting decisively are more powerful than fear or intimidation. Tom knelt briefly beside Emily, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. You saw it, Em. Sometimes courage isn't about fighting. It's about knowing who you are, what's yours, and standing firm. Emily's eyes shone. I want to be brave, like him. Like you, Dad. Like the General. Whitman's voice carried softly across the farm. Bravery is not just confrontation. It is understanding, patience, and knowing when to act. Today, all of you demonstrated that. Remember it. Meanwhile, the security company, unaware of the growing community awareness, received complaints from multiple residents in the following days. Internal investigations began, and the officer who had trespassed faced disciplinary action for his actions. His overconfidence and disregard for property boundaries were documented, ensuring that such behavior would not be repeated. On the Hammond farm, life slowly returned to normal. Emily helped her father feed the livestock, gather eggs, and repair fences, but the sense of vigilance lingered. The confrontation had changed them not through fear, but through the understanding that courage, observation, and moral clarity were powerful tools. The neighbors began forming informal watch groups, coordinating with the Hammonds and Whitman to ensure that the area remained safe and respected. Conversations flowed freely, stories of previous harassment were shared, and a sense of unity developed that had been absent for decades. The community realized that individual courage, reinforced by collective support, was stronger than any authority that sought to intimidate or trespass. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and cast a golden glow over the fields, Tom, Emily, and Whitman stood together on the porch. The farm was quiet, the animals settled, and the wind rustled gently through the trees. You know, Tom said quietly, I used to think we were alone out here, that our land and our lives could be threatened without anyone to help." Whitman nodded. "Isolation is a vulnerability. Awareness and presence transform it into strength." Today was a reminder of that. Emily leaned into her father's side. "I'll never forget this, Dad. I want to help protect the farm too." Tom smiled, a mixture of pride and relief. "And you will. You've already learned the most important lesson, that courage, principle, and vigilance are the foundation of protection. With those, nothing can take what is ours." Whitman's gaze swept across the horizon, eyes reflecting a lifetime of experience and quiet satisfaction. "Remember this moment. Lessons learned under pressure remain etched in memory. And sometimes, protection comes not from confrontation, but from being seen, observed, and respected." The farm, safe and thriving, stood as a testament to the resilience of the family, the strength of community, and the quiet power of one man who had served his country, and now served his neighbors in the most profound way by reminding them that courage and vigilance are timeless virtues. For Tom and Emily, the events of that morning became a story they would tell for years, a story not of fear, but of empowerment, justice, and the unwavering protection of what is rightfully theirs. The days following the confrontation passed in a mixture of relief and reflection. Life on the Hammond farm slowly returned to its familiar rhythm. Chickens clucked in the coop, cows lowed in the pasture, and the wind rustled gently through the wheat and corn. Yet, beneath this calm, a subtle transformation had taken place. The family, the neighbors, and even the surrounding countryside carried the echoes of that morning, a reminder of courage, vigilance, and justice. Tom and Emily resumed their chores, but their movements were no longer just habitual. Each task, feeding the animals, mending fences, checking irrigation ditches, was now accompanied by awareness, a quiet vigilance born from experience. Emily, once a shy and observant teenager, now held herself differently. There was a steadiness in her eyes, a sense that she understood more than she had the day before. "Dad," she said one afternoon, brushing hay off her hands as they repaired a section of the fence together, "I never realized how much courage it takes to protect something, everything that matters. I want to learn how to be responsible like that, to notice things before they become problems." Tom smiled, pride shining in his weathered face. "You've learned the hardest lesson already, Emily. Courage isn't about fighting or yelling, it's about seeing clearly, understanding the situation, and acting when it matters most. You did that today, even if you didn't realize it." Across the farm, General Whitman tended his own land but frequently visited, sharing wisdom with Tom and Emily. On one afternoon, he joined them in the orchard, leaning on his cane, observing the young girl prune branches. "Emily," he said softly, "strength is as much about patience and observation as it is about action. The best defense often begins with awareness. If you notice something amiss before it escalates, you've already won half the battle." Emily nodded, absorbing every word. "I think I understand," she said. "It's like knowing the land, knowing the people, and knowing myself." Whitman's eyes twinkled with approval. "Exactly. Respect your boundaries, protect them, and be willing to stand firm when necessary." That is what today taught you and everyone around this farm. Meanwhile, the story of the trespassing officer spread through the community. Neighbors who had once been hesitant to speak out began sharing their experiences. Some had faced fines, warnings, or intimidation from the same security company. The incident at the Hammond farm became a rallying point for local residents, reminding them of their collective strength. A small community meeting was held at the town hall. Tom and Whitman attended, sharing the events and emphasizing the importance of documenting encounters, understanding property rights, and standing together against intimidation. The neighbors listened intently, many taking notes and exchanging contact information to form an informal neighborhood watch. The once isolated farm community now had a network of support, a tangible sense of solidarity that extended far beyond the Hammond property. Emily, inspired by the event and the general's mentorship, began a small journal where she documented lessons, observations, and reflections. She included sketches of the farm, her father, and Whitman standing confidently before the intruding officer. Each entry captured the essence of what she had learned about courage, vigilance, and moral clarity. Tom observed her quietly one evening as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the fields. "Emily," he said, his voice low and reflective, "your mother would be proud of you. She always believed that family, courage, and hard work were the foundation of everything. Today, you honored that belief." Emily smiled, leaning against him. "I feel like I understand her more now. And you too, Dad. And I understand what the general meant about strength being quiet, steady, and careful." Whitman, standing nearby and watching the interaction, felt a quiet satisfaction. His role in the confrontation had been decisive. But what mattered most was the long-term effect, the lessons imparted. The community strengthened, and the younger generation learning to observe, act, and protect. Over the following weeks, the security company faced repercussions for the trespassing incident. The officer received formal warnings and mandatory retraining, while policies were revised to prevent future violations. Tom and Emily felt a quiet satisfaction, not just in justice being served, but in the knowledge that their vigilance and courage had sparked a positive change in their community. Life on the farm continued, but it carried new meaning. The fields were not just crops. They were symbols of persistence and protection. The barn was more than shelter. It was a bastion of safety and family legacy. Emily, once hesitant to step beyond her chores, now took an active role in observing the farm, learning from her father and the general how to anticipate challenges before they arose. One late afternoon, as the sun painted the sky with hues of orange and pink, Tom, Emily, and Whitman stood on the porch together. The farm stretched before them, quiet, safe, and thriving. "You've done well," Whitman said softly. "Remember today, and remember the principles behind it. Courage, vigilance, and community. These are your greatest allies." Emily looked out over the fields, feeling a sense of pride and responsibility she had never known. "I will," she whispered, "I promise." Tom placed a hand on her shoulder, glancing at the general. "Thank you," he said simply. "For everything," Whitman nodded, his eyes reflecting decades of experience and quiet wisdom. "The land, the family, and the community are worth protecting." Today, all of you demonstrated that. That is the real victory. As darkness settled over the farm, the family returned to their routines. The night air filled with the gentle sounds of nature, crickets chirping, owls calling in the distance, and the rustling of leaves in the wind. The Hammond farm stood as a symbol of courage, resilience, and unity, a reminder that even in the face of arrogance and trespassing, vigilance, authority, and moral clarity could preserve what is sacred. And as Emily lay in bed that night, pen in hand, she wrote the final words in her journal for the day. Courage is not loud. It is steady, it is careful, and it is willing to act. And when people stand together, even the smallest voices can protect what is right. The Hammond farm remained untouched, thriving under the watchful eyes of its family, its community, and a retired general who understood that true protection often comes not from confrontation alone, but from wisdom, presence, and unwavering principles.